Check out that harvest. Hey guys, Stephanie here with the Aeroponic Tower channel, and today I want to talk about how to grow on an aeroponic tower garden indoors. And specifically, what to grow on an aeroponic tower garden when you're growing indoors. I wanted to wait and make these videos and this series of videos about growing indoors once my towers were indoors, but I've noticed a lot of people are moving their towers indoors or just getting started and want to grow indoors for a couple of reasons. Their weather has become extremely hot in the summer, where they just don't want to be gardening outside, or it's already too cold in their region and they need to have their towers inside. So I wanted to get this information out there because I see a few mistakes that most new tower gardeners make when they're growing inside. So let's dive in and chat all things growing indoors on an aeroponic tower garden. So one of the things, and just to give you an idea of how I work my towers if you're new here, I grow outdoors 3 seasons out of the year, just right on my driveway. I keep it simple. I grow a ton of food. I have 9 towers and I consider myself a homesteader. So I have come up with simple, sustainable systems to grow a lot of food in small spaces. And we have 13.5 acres here, but it's mostly forest. And I have just found, and I'll share a link below of my story and kind of how we got to this place, but I have found that bigger causes bigger problems and doesn't actually produce a bigger return on investment when it comes to growing food. Whether that's chickens or rabbits, I've done rabbits in the past, I've done quail, or gardens. I have found just by increasing the number of chickens you have, for example, does not mean you get more eggs. It usually means you spend more money, you get more headaches, and you might get a couple more eggs. The payoff is not equivalent to the amount of work and the amount of resources that goes into that project. And I learned this the hard way through trying small batches of chickens, and then I've had as many as 100 chickens at one time, which is insane. But what I've learned now, I keep 5 chickens, and I'm going to do a video on my chickens at some point, just kind of how I raise them. And I chose a breed that's highly, highly productive, and I rotate my birds out every 2 years. And I only keep 5 chickens, and 5 chickens gives us everything we need to eat and cook with, egg-wise, plus some to share or to trade with neighbors for other things that they have that I don't have. That is based on the variety I have that is very, very prolific in their egg laying, and then the diet I feed them and how I manage them and keep them in a small space. And this isn't a chicken video, so I don't know why I'm ranting about chickens. But all that to say that by honing in on exactly what we need to provide for our family, I was able to reduce my flock to a very simple flock that I only have to buy feed for them once a quarter, which is really great. I can supplement with worm farming and with my gardens and with things in the yard, and then with our scrap food. All of that produces very high quality, perfect amount of food with little waste at using little resources. And that's what the towers are too. The towers, all that to say, that's how I got into tower gardening, to transition to the same thing. So I'm growing on 9 of them for that reason. I'm growing the majority of our own food. These towers will go into our garage, and I keep our garage temperature controlled throughout the winter, just so I can grow food year round. It's been a huge game changer for being able to replace the grocery store and save money and deal with inflation and make sure we're eating clean, better than organic produce year round that's full of nutrients, because it goes right from the towers into our stomachs right away. These will go into the garage pretty soon. I usually wait until our frosts are consistent. Some of them can stay outside during cold weather because I have cool weather crops in them, and some of them are things like tomatoes and peppers and eggplants, and those and squash, and those will have to go into, and cucumbers, and those will have to go into the garage as soon as it starts to cool down. I would say below the 50s consistently, then those will be in the garage so that we can continue to have access to those foods year round. Now, growing indoors is different than growing outside, obviously. But one mistake that I see often is that someone who's new to gardening will just grab seeds and start planting and doesn't quite understand the difference between growing indoors and outdoors, which is totally normal. If you're new to gardening, you wouldn't know that, right? If you're just getting started. But there is some rules we have to follow when growing indoors. So there are other systems on the market, little tabletop hydroponic systems, and I've been sent a lot of those things to review. And those are for more like an herb garden on the countertop. That is a small kind of supplemental feel-good system, and yes, you get to harvest a head of lettuce occasionally and pick off some fresh herbs for dinner, and those are wonderful, wonderful things. I think anytime we can get homegrown food into our bodies, it's just so wonderful for our health and wellness and mental health and wellness. But on the towers, we're growing food. We're growing food that can replace the grocery store, and we do that through a couple of methods. Through interval planting, which means I am going to harvest this lettuce. I need dinner tonight, obviously. We need food to eat. I'm going to find something on this tower to eat tonight, and I'm gonna take it out. And because I'm always starting seeds, I have new seedlings, and I have something that can go and take its place. I have all sorts of gorgeous red oak leaf lettuce here that's gonna grow super fast because these are mature, they're ready to go in the tower. And I'm gonna plop that in, and in 3 weeks I'm gonna be harvesting this lettuce and repeating the process over and over again. I also keep things on my towers like cilantro for recipes. I have nettle because we use stinging nettle for teas. I have parsley. I have watercress for salads and for juicing and for smoothies. So I have all these foods that we consume daily that offer me ingredients for meals. So a lot of times it's peppers and herbs and maybe some scallions to make a meal more interesting and flavorful and more nutritious. And sometimes it's actually harvesting like whole heads of lettuce or whole heads of cabbage to make meals out of those. But when we're growing outside, I have more space for one, and I have natural sunlight, and I get some rain exposure. All of those things allow for bigger plants to grow faster and to produce more fruit, like this gorgeous eggplant here. And when we move our towers indoors, it'll depend on the climate inside. If you're growing it in your house, you're keeping your temperatures in the 70s, then that's a little bit warmer and food may grow a little bit faster. Versus this garage last year, I only kept at 65 just to keep our heat costs down. I have some tricks if you're in a situation like me where you want to keep the heat a little you want to keep it a little bit cooler. You can add heaters into the tanks of your towers, just like a fish tank heater, and I'll link some of those below that I think are really great options. Very affordable option. You just plug it in, stick the heater in there, and what that's going to do is keep the water temperature more consistent, which that's what really affects the plants. The water temperature is what's going to really control their growing environment more so than the air temperature. But when we're growing indoors, we're also growing with artificial lights, and artificial lights just are not the same as the sun. It's just not. And so we need to be mindful of, one, that we don't have the sun, and so there's some things that just aren't going to be able to fruit without the sunlight. We're also going to have lights on these, and I'll put a picture of what that looks like. And the lights are movable. They're like these claw arms, and that is so great. That's actually one of the reasons I chose tower gardens, because the lights don't limit what I can grow. I can grow bushier plants like this pepper and this eggplant. The lights would totally cover this distance with no problem, but artificial light isn't going to give plants it's not going to give every single plant what it needs to produce fruit. And the sun just came out. I had perfect weather for filming, and now it's sunny. But anyway, the other issue is when you're growing indoors, we don't want to grow traditional things like tomatoes. We can't grow winter squash and melons. We can't grow cucumbers that are going to have huge vines that take over. That doesn't mean we can't grow tomatoes or cucumbers. But we need to be smart about the varieties we choose and think about the limitations of our system. So this is a flex system. It's a little bit bigger. It's a 20-gallon tank, and it's not bigger. The grow ports are exactly the same as this one back here, the home unit. It's just the tank is bigger. It makes for growing things like an entire tower of tomatoes easier because it's not going to run out of water as fast in the summer in the heat, producing a heavy water fruit like a tomato. This right here is our home garden. It's on wheels, and it's a smaller profile, and it's the one that a lot of people start with if they're going to grow in their house because it's already on wheels. It's easy to move around. You can put the grow cage on it. I have a grow cage on this one, and it's got baby greens extensions in it, which allow you to grow more food, smaller variety of foods. And you get a lot more kind of bang for your buck out of this system. And this actually has a baby greens extension kit on it. So you can see just all the greens I'm growing from the top up. Now, when growing indoors, we're not limited to just greens. But if we want to grow more summer crops, there are some tips to make that successful and some things to be mindful of. So one of the ways that I have been able to grow cucumbers inside is by growing a dwarf variety. So on this tower here, I don't know if you guys can see that, is a dwarf variety cucumber. It's a container sized variety. What that means is overall it's smaller. So a regular cucumber, if you're new to gardening and haven't grown a regular cucumber outside, it can take over massive amounts of space. It can just trail and take over huge beds, and you need to trellis it and manage it. And it can go through a really big growth period where it's producing a lot of vines and a lot of leaves before it ever gets to the fruiting stage. And then typically with cucumbers, a lot of the times, it produces a lot of fruit at once it's got this established vines and greens, and then it kind of burns out because it gets hot or diseases or things like that. We don't have that capability indoors. But with a patio variety or with a dwarf variety cucumber, you're going to get a small plant, and this one's already producing fruit. And this is a pickle variety, which is a smaller cucumber, but you are going to get smaller fruits, but you're going to get them a lot faster. This plant is barely taking up any space on my tower. I don't know if you can see that. It's pretty insignificant. I've got one part trailing down here, and I can easily put a cage on this and wind this around the cage. A cage is just what this is right here. And this can continue to grow, and it's not going to shade out all my plants. It's not taking over, and it's producing food really quickly. I can see 1, 2, 3, 4. I can see 6 cucumbers already on there, and I actually harvested 2 yesterday. So that's a lot of food for the size of that plant, and it's totally doable. Now, what you can see, and I don't know if you can see this, I have some powdery mildew. Plants like cucumbers and squash are going to need to be pruned. On a tower, I prune them anyway, regardless. And they need to be pruned frequently, and then I have a special spray that I put on mine, and it keeps the powdery mildew away, or if it already has powdery mildew, it's a way to handle it. It's a very simple formula. It's a 16-ounce water bottle with water, and leave a little bit of room in there, and then I use just a teaspoon of dish soap, something clean like Dr. Bronner's. I was using the Myers concentrate cleaner, and I really liked the success of that, but I found out it wasn't a clean product. So I've gone to using Dr. Bronner's, and it works fine. And then the pH Plus, 2 capfuls of your pH Plus, which is, if you're new to tower gardening, when you buy your tower, it comes with a pH Plus and a pH negative, and it's how you raise or lower the acidity of your tank if you're checking your water, just to get the optimal acidity for your plants to grow in. And I spray that on, and when I'm growing indoors, I do that twice a week as a preventative, just because you're not going to have a lot of airflow. We get powdery mildew here because we get a lot of rain, and we're very moist, and we're in the rainforest. If you're in a really dry area, you may not have that issue in your outdoor gardens. I have found pretty much every squash and cucumber in almost every region just gets powdery mildew at some point, even if it's not super rainy in those areas. But that's what's going to happen inside. So you would maintain it like that, harvest your cucumbers, and then if this starts to get too big, or it starts to be overtaken with powdery mildew, or if you see some browning and some crunchy leaves, that's when you're just starting over. And so when I'm growing, I'm indoors, I'm using interval gardening, and I'm assuming my plants are going to produce. Maybe I'll get 15 cucumbers out of this, and then I'm gonna need to take it out and put another one in, which means I need to start that cucumber that I want to replace this one. I need to have that started about 2 weeks after this one gets established, so that when I pull this one out, I already have one on the other side of the tower that's beginning to fruit, and then I have another one in my grow station that's germinating and starting seeds, and we rotate just like that. So growing indoors, if you want to do zucchinis and squash, summer squash and cucumbers, that is the method I recommend. I don't know of any dwarf variety summer squash, but heavily pruning, and I'll show you what that looks like in a minute. And then also treating all the leaves for the powdery mildew at least twice a week, and just be prepared. Have several going, different ages all the time, and you're going to have cucumbers full-time, squash pretty regularly, and the same as with tomatoes. So with tomatoes, if you try to grow, and what'll commonly happen is people love cherry tomatoes, and they will plant a cherry tomato on their tower. Well, a cherry tomato is typically indeterminate, meaning it's going to produce and produce and produce and produce until it gets diseased and dies. It does not have an end. It will just keep growing as long as the conditions are right. What that means when you're growing indoors is that you have this gorgeous tower one day, and 3 weeks later you basically have a tomato plant bomb, and you don't have any tomatoes. It'll flower, but there can be hundreds of flowers, but then those get outside the light because it's huge. These plants, these cherry tomato plants, just get really, really big, and now they're outside the light, and they're not going to get the optimal stuff they need to produce fruit, because that kind of tomato needs the sun. It needs the rain, it needs the natural environment. So that kind of tomato needs the sun, and it needs space. So, and I have a video on growing even dwarf tomatoes in outside too. I will link that below, because rarely do I put a full-size tomato on my towers. There's other varieties that just do better and are easier to manage, and it goes back to that concept I mentioned with the chickens. I can have 30 chickens. I have enough room for it. I've got enough cages for it, but does having 30 chickens offer any benefit, or is it really more just exhausting, and I end up with about the same amount of food in the end, but ended up with a lot more work trying to manage those 30 chickens versus my 5. Same concept with the tomatoes. And that's where the turning them over, and I don't think I've finished that part of my story. I do this with my chickens too. Every 2 years, I have a breeder who I buy pullets from. I've just had enough chick experience in my life that I don't feel the need to have baby chicks. Doesn't mean I never will. I'm sure at some point I'll crave some baby chicks again. But I buy pullets from her, which are a chicken that's about to start laying, and now I'm up to every spring. I order those from her. I pick up 2, and I get rid of 2 of my current chickens that are reaching the 2-year mark. And I do that and just kind of rotate. New chickens coming in, older ones going out. Some people may not love that idea. Their chickens, I know, can be pets, and they love their chickens. That's not the case for me. These chickens are great, and they're treated wonderfully, but they're not my pets. They are egg producers and are waste eaters. And what I do is I get on our Facebook, our local group, and they will be gone within 30 minutes of me listing them, and I get a little bit of money back for those. And they move on to serve another purpose. A lot of people around here just free range their chickens and just like to have a lot of chickens. So they take those, and then I get younger layers, which means I get more eggs. Same concept with the towers. Sorry to rant and ramble. Sometimes when I share this content, I just have a lot I want to share with you guys and really like beat that concept in so that you have the most success growing this way as well. So with tomatoes, it's the same idea. We want to plant the right tomatoes, and so I will link below a list of what I've chosen, and I'll show you guys those right now. Okay, so when I'm growing in the spring, I grew dwarf variety tomatoes, which are just smaller plants. You can get the same tomatoes. It doesn't mean the fruit has to be smaller, but what I have found is typically the fruit is smaller. To me, that is fine, because to go eat a beefsteak tomato this big that weighs a pound, we just don't go through it that fast. And so I find just as much enjoyment like harvesting a whole cucumber. I can go eat this and then come grab another one. So the food can be a little bit smaller with dwarf varieties. Not all of them. I grew some pretty decent size, but just know it does make your food a little bit smaller. To me, that also fits into that chicken rule where smaller foods, smaller harvests mean not a lot of waste and not having to do a lot of food prep. As far as preserving things, I can harvest a couple of tomatoes, a couple of cucumbers, go make a Greek salad, and we can eat it all, and I'm not stuck having to put a lot of this in the refrigerator for days and days and days. So I grew dwarf tomatoes, but in the winter, and I have 9 of them planted, 2 of them didn't come up, so I'm gonna work on getting those established this week. I am planting 11 varieties of micro dwarf tomatoes, and I am going to succession plant those, or interval plant those. So right now I'm timing it because I'm not 100% sure when they're gonna burn out. So I am every month starting a few new seeds of tomatoes. And the reason with doing it more frequently, I would never do that in the summer months. I did start some in the early spring. Actually late winter, I started some tomato plants in the garage, and then early spring, mid-spring, early summer, and then I started some in the late summer for fall crops so that I had a continual harvest of tomatoes outside. But that's a little bit different. With these, there's a couple that are indeterminate, so they're gonna keep producing fruit until the plant gets diseased and can't do it anymore. But the majority are gonna be determinate plants, meaning they're gonna have a set number of blooms, which those blooms are gonna become our fruit. And when they're done, they're done. So I need to make sure I have new plants coming up at the same time that the older plants are burning out. So if I'm harvesting my last tomato crop off of one of these, I want to make sure I have another plant that's just starting to produce or midway producing, so that we're in tomatoes all winter long. These are really great, and I will link this below as well. It took me a long time to find micro dwarf varieties that taste good and have good texture. There are some like Tom Hat and Orange Thumb, a few varieties that are okay. They have thicker skins. They've been bred out of texture and flavor in order to get that super micro size. These are not the case. It's not the case with these. These are a little bit larger. So they're gonna be a dwarf or a micro dwarf, but they're still gonna get maybe 2 feet wide by 2 feet tall, depending on my temperatures. And many of these are determinate, like I said, so they're gonna burn out. So you need to have those other plants ready to step in and take their place. And I found, I don't like to have to go buy 2 seeds from here and 2 seeds from this company because that's very expensive with shipping. So I found this company called Totally Tomatoes, and they had just a really spectacular selection of micro dwarf tomatoes so that I didn't have to shop around and piecemeal that together. So I got a Husky Cherry Red hybrid, which is an indeterminate. So this one may produce a little bit longer. So I only might need to start this one maybe every 6 weeks. It's still gonna burn out. Tomatoes are still gonna get diseases and get tired, just like your cucumbers and your peppers. That's just the nature of those foods. They're heavy fruiters, they get worn out and they're done. So that one is indeterminate, but most of these are determinate. This is a Heartbreaker Dora Red, and it's a heart-shaped grape-sized tomato. So a little bit bigger than a cherry tomato. Gold Nugget, I love yellow tomatoes, and that's a determinate yellow cherry tomato. Saladette, it's determinate, and I don't know what kind of tomato that is. It doesn't say on there. I got some mini plum tomatoes. Plum tomato is going to be, you know, the size of a plum. Those are great for salads. That one's also determinate. This one is an early resilience hybrid. This is a Roma tomato, and it's determinate as well. Roma tomatoes are great for making salsas or less watery dishes. So I'm probably gonna start maybe even 6 of these and see if I can't get enough Roma tomatoes to make my spaghetti sauces throughout the winter. So that's a great option. A tumbler, this is a red cherry. There's rain coming. Great for the mushrooms. Not so good for this video. Tom yellow, cherry, ruby crush. So I'll list all of these below so you can see what I chose. These are the tomatoes you want to grow if you're growing indoors. I would not fuss with, you can grow dwarf varieties. I feel like these are just as good and so much easier to manage that I personally don't even think I would do a standard dwarf indoors. I would just go right for the good quality micro dwarfs, and I will list this below so you have access to this so you know exactly which ones to order. And then right now my cycle is once every month. I'm starting the seeds and I'll let you know how that goes. Everybody's growing conditions are going to be different, so that may work for me. You may want to do every 5 weeks, or you may need to do every 3 weeks, or maybe your stuff is growing a little bit slower and you need to have 4 plants going at one time so that you have more food to harvest, because if things are growing slower, it's better to grow more of that thing like every month so that you have more access to food. Tips like that for interval training. Hopefully that's not confusing and makes sense. So tomatoes, those are the ones. Eggplant, Patio Baby is a dwarf variety. I have not experienced or tried to grow a whole lot of eggplant indoors, so I don't want to give you any personal experience with that because I don't have it. This year I am growing several eggplants indoors. I think the one that would be most successful is the Patio Baby from Park Seed. It's a dwarf variety and it's just prolific and super easy to take care of, and I don't see any reason why it wouldn't thrive indoors unless it was super cool temperatures. Like my garage at 65 may not be warm enough. I'm actually going to go up to 70 this year. 70 is kind of that ideal growing temperature, 70, 75. So I will let you guys know and keep you posted. I don't see why you couldn't. No, peppers you can grow indoors. Peppers are just a pepper. Any variety is fine. Pepper plants aren't super massive. There's nothing really special about them as far as needing to get a smaller dwarf variety or any size like that. There are some fantastic micro dwarf hot peppers and chili peppers that you can grow if you're a hot pepper person. I think those are so fun because, you know, even in a baby green section, you could grow a whole row of like red chili peppers, the little micro dwarfs. That would look so cool, and just have an abundance of those. So there are varieties you can play with. You don't want to do any winter squash. You cannot do any melons. Anything vining is not going to be ideal if it's a massive vine like those winter squashes. You can grow peas. Sometimes peas can be a little bit finicky. This is by Rare Seeds. I forget the variety. It's so gorgeous. The thing with a pea is give it space, and there's some browning in here, and that's common. And a lot of times I'll get that question, like, why are they brown near the hub, like near the where the plant's growing out of the grow port? That's just what peas do. They do it in the garden too. If you were to go, if you look at the top of a trellis of peas, it's like peas and gorgeous vines, and these are edible, by the way. The ends are amazing on salads. They taste like the pea. And if you go towards the bottom, it's kind of brown and missing some of the leaves. That's just the nature of the pea. You just notice it more on a tower. The trick with peas is, like, if you were to plant one rockwool of a pea, you're not gonna really have peas. You need to plant a decent amount of peas if you want to have snap peas to eat. So on here I have planted 16 plants, and that's a good amount to give us like a handful of peas to add to salads. I like to cook them, saute them, and make them as part of a meal a couple of times a week. So just be mindful of that too with the pea. Probably not worth it if you only have 2 grow ports to designate to it, but if you can designate 10 grow ports to peas and they're important for your diet, then excellent. The more you can designate, the better you're going to be in growing peas. So that's what's on the bottom here. It's just a pea tower. Broccoli, cauliflower. These are tricky. Brussels sprouts. Brussels sprouts, I would not recommend growing inside. I'm not going to say you can't. There are people who do amazing things with broccoli and cauliflower and Brussels sprouts that I can't comprehend how they could do that indoors. But to me, it's not worth the effort to grow something like a Brussels sprout on a tower indoors for a couple of reasons. A Brussels sprout is a huge plant. It can be this tall just to start producing Brussels sprouts. It's very long to get it to fruit, and it's going to shade a lot of this other stuff, so you're going to be limiting what you can grow around it because it's going to be consuming all of the space and the lights, and at the end you're going to get, you know, a couple of pints of Brussels sprouts after months. So I don't feel like it's worth it. I'm not saying it's not worth it outside. I have yet to grow Brussels sprouts in my towers. I will do it when I have enough towers that I have expendable real estate. And that's how I like to think of things that are a little bit finicky and large and take a long time. It's got to be worth it. It's got to be worth giving up that space for those things. And that would require me having a couple more towers, because there's a few other things like watermelon and cantaloupes that at the grocery store the quality's really gone down. Big GMO issues with those, big modification issues with those going on. So I want to be able to grow all of those, and I would do that before I would do Brussels sprouts, because Brussels sprouts are actually a pretty clean crop at the grocery store. They fall into more of that clean 15, and I can grow things like kohlrabi indoors very easily and outdoors. Kohlrabi grows really quickly, and it's, to me, the same. It's not a Brussels sprout, but it's in the same family and can kind of fill that gap. And I'll do that with other things. Another one is spinach. I get the question, people are programmed, we've been sort of programmed to think spinach as a health food. It's easily available at the grocery store, it's affordable, so it's become a common thing in people's diets, especially people who try to eat a healthier diet. And it doesn't grow great on a tower indoors. I have found it goes to seed quickly, which it bolts, and it stays small, and the amount you get is not worth the real estate it takes. And it's almost like that in my outdoor gardens too. I have to grow a decent amount of spinach, I have to take an entire big raised bed and I have to heavily seed it, almost covering the entire top, and then I'll get enough spinach to maybe put a couple of gallon bags away for the future. And that's a large space and a lot of resources for a little return. Where if I grow something like watercress, which that's not a good spinach replacement, but it grows in abundance, and I'm harvesting this every other day and getting a ton from it. There's Mizuna and Mabuna, those are mustards and very similar to spinach. There's Chai Jai Mai Sai, and there's tot soy and lots of bok choys and greens that can give you that similar experience as spinach, but produce faster, produce better, and are actually more nutritious and have a higher nutritional value than spinach. So I don't grow spinach. I just started some seeds, and I am going to do a fall spinach garden before these go into the garage, but after that I won't even attempt to grow spinach indoors for that reason. There's better options, and if you need suggestions on what those options are, there's something weird on my tomatoes, and if you'd like suggestions on those, you know, post in the comments and I'd be glad to give you a list of greens that are more nutritious, grow in abundance, and can save you a ton of money if you can just transition off of spinach and grow those things on your tower. Root vegetables, beets grow amazing on a tower. I love my beets so much. I have one right here, and I was doing and turnips. I was doing one seed per rock wool for a while in the early spring and was getting these big huge root vegetables. I have since moved to doing 3 to 4 seeds because you can see all the wasted space in this grow port here where I could easily have 3 beets growing, and then I can harvest the largest one and eat that one on my salad, and the other 2 have an opportunity to grow bigger. You're not fighting over nutrients when you're growing in a tower, so they're not going to dwarf because they're fighting over nutrients. They can just be crowded and maybe not get as much light because of the greens. So by harvesting this one, the others get more space and more greens, and it just gives me a larger harvest. I interval plant those, same thing. I start beets all the time, so I'm constantly harvesting beets. What else? We discussed peppers, summer squash. I think that's it. As far as growing indoors, then any green and any herb, you're good to go. They do amazing. There is no shortage. And so for me, my winter diet shifts a little bit. Right now we are coming out of the season of buckets and buckets full of tomatoes. So I'm doing a lot of recipes with tomatoes, and I'm preserving these, and I've got lots of peppers, and so we're making larger meals with these kinds of things. And as we move into the winter gardens, that's going to shift, and I'm going to have smaller harvests, and I'm going to be more green heavy. Now I think that's wonderful because these towers reversed my SAD, seasonal affective disorder. Just being able to grow when there's snow on the ground changed my whole world. Awesome. I will come out here in the middle of the winter when I need to just be out of our cabin for a little bit, and I go spend time starting seeds and harvesting and making videos and talking about plants, and it's so rewarding. So I love growing inside in the winter, and I love the green abundance because that time of year we think we want the warm soups and the warm veggies, and a lot of this stuff I've been preserving will come out in those months as we do make some of those meals. But there's so much joy in being able to have a fresh, crisp salad with your soup right off your tower. And that has just been the biggest game changer for me. I absolutely love growing on the towers, and I love the green abundance. It's also a great time to grow your herbs. So lots of cilantro and dill and basil. I've got my chives going crazy here. All of those herbs really help to make the meals you are making over the winter tastier. Turnips make an excellent winter soup meal. And then you still have your peppers and your tomatoes and all those things to go in your salads too, cucumbers. So let me show you how to prune squash and what I would keep them like if you're growing indoors. Okay, and one thing, so I just thinned that out, and you can see all the cucumbers growing, and now we've got all these flowers. We've got better light exposure and airflow. I took off all the ones with powdery mildew, and I'm gonna give this a preventative spray, and that's it. I do the same with my squash. I try to make sure no leaves are touching is kind of the goal. Just give them a little airflow between them. Now, one thing I didn't mention is pollinating. So cucumbers and summer squash you're going to have to hand pollinate. You don't have to with your tomatoes or your peppers or your eggplant. Those can be done by just shaking the plant when it's flowering, putting a little fan. A lot of people say to put a fan in their space. My space is not pretty airtight and I get airflow, so I don't worry about that, but that's another way you can increase your things pollinating or just having good airflow. If you have it in a room that's pretty stagnant, a fan would be a good idea. And that's it. I'm going to give it nice airflow. And then to pollinate these, I just take a little paintbrush, one of my daughter's craft paintbrushes, and I'm going to go from one flower to the next, to the next. And that's just a great morning coffee activity. Find the flowers that are open and just brush from one to the next to the next. That's on cucumbers. On summer squash, you need to tell the difference between the male flowers and the female flowers. And this weather is so incredible. Sorry for the lighting, it's probably not that great, but it is fantastic out. So this is a summer squash, zucchini or something. I'm not sure. I also have heard don't grow cucumbers next to zucchini. I have cucumbers next to zucchini. I don't really know what the thought is there. I see zero issues doing that. I do it all the time. So this one has some powdery mildew too. So when I get off this video, I will treat all of these. But I want to thin these out. These are way overcrowded with leaves. Doesn't matter. We're gonna thin these. Anything crossing, I get rid of. This guy over here. And it may look like I'm taking a ton and like too many because then it can't grow, but it's fine. These leaves will become the main shining stars in a day or two. It does not take much. And over here, just some bad, this is a cucumber. I'll see this question a lot, like what's wrong with this cucumber that I'm growing? Not my cucumber, but the person's cucumber. It's getting crispy edges. It again, sometimes it's just the nature of these plants. They grow, they fruit, they die. We start over. So just keep that in mind. Cucumbers is one of them. It's time to start new cucumber seeds. When I start to see signs like that, I want to make sure I have a new cucumber ready to go soon. And I did. I started seeds last week, and those are going to be ready to come out here in the next couple of days. They'll grow super fast because they're dwarf varieties. They will produce an abundance of these cucumbers all over, and then they'll die out, and I'll have another one ready to take its place. And that's getting better. All right, so I've thinned this out pretty good. And that tower back there is my old tomato tower. I'm about to take that apart. And I have my brassicas. I have broccoli, cauliflower. Oh, that's what we need to talk about. And edamame ready to go in that tower today. Super excited about that. But don't be afraid to heavily prune these. They're gonna fill back out quickly. And it's just gonna promote fruiting. It's gonna help force these cucumbers to produce their fruit faster. You're gonna have better airflow, less disease, less mess on your tower when you're indoors. Just overall, it's better to keep them highly pruned, in my opinion, and to turn them over. Get new plants going so that the minute this gets where you just don't love the look anymore, it's feeling ratty, it doesn't matter because you got another one on the other side that's looking absolutely gorgeous and ready to peak in its fruit. And we don't have to worry about this one aging. So that looks much better already. Broccoli, cauliflower. I was talking about, so I was talking earlier about Brussels sprouts not being worth the effort in the real estate. I feel that way about broccoli indoors. I have never been able to get broccoli to produce a broccoli floret inside. I've grown it in the winter because I like the greens, but you're just gonna get broccoli greens from my experience. Doesn't mean don't try it. I'm actually trying a different variety right now outside to see if I can start to get broccoli established enough outside that when I move it inside it'll fruit. I'll keep you posted. Cauliflower, I can get to produce. It's definitely bigger and better outside. So it might be, and broccoli and cauliflower can take a while to produce. So it goes back to that, is it worth the real estate? Because if it takes 4 months to produce, you know, a mediocre head of cauliflower, I don't personally think that's worth the real estate. Because in that same grow port, you could grow 3 kohlrabis in that amount of time. And that's like a head of cabbage that are amazing. You could grow 4 or 5 Napa cabbages in that amount of time. You could grow Napa cabbage, collard greens, all sorts of other foods a lot faster and have a lot more food consumption going on versus trying to grow a cauliflower in that space. So that's my personal opinion. Now I'm still doing it and I'm still playing with it because I would like to master it and then be able to teach you guys here. I do grow cauliflower and I am gonna grow broccoli this fall in my towers. Outside, it's best to grow them in the sunniest spots possible towards the top of the tower. This one right here actually. And that helps Indoors though, I think if you really want a brassica type food, kohlrabi is your best bet. If you haven't had kohlrabi, it tastes very much like a cabbage, but it's like an apple ball and just really delicious. Kind of a cross between a cabbage and a turnip without the heat. Really great. It's in that brassica family. I chop it up and eat it like we would a brassica, like broccoli or cauliflower. I grow lots of cabbages, and those can kind of fill that brassica desire. And here's a great example. This is a gorgeous winter cabbage. This is a Napa cabbage forming. These produce in just a few weeks, and this can provide so much food, where a cauliflower or broccoli can just sit there and become very frustrating to the in-home gardener. On a tower garden where you feel like you're not getting your money's worth and you're not replacing the grocery store, because you're growing these foods that just take a really long time. And so that is my advice. Interval plant. Start your seeds every couple of weeks. Take your whole food out. Come out and look at your tower. And this lettuce is young. This lettuce can get a lot bigger, so I'm probably not going to harvest that one. But if all I have is that, and we want a salad for dinner, even if we don't want a salad for dinner, we need to have a salad for dinner. So I will harvest it, and I will have another plant ready to take its place. Sometimes I harvest these cabbage when they're small like this and make stir fry, because we need food on the table, and it's better to eat it young than to let it sit there too long and never eat it, or to come and eat a couple of leaves. I find it's better just to take out the whole plant, make a meal out of it, have another seedling ready to go. And by consistently doing that, I come to a place where I don't have to harvest this tonight. Obviously, you can see I have an abundance of options for dinner tonight for us off these towers indoors. If you want to see some of my plants growing indoors, if you go back to my earlier videos, they were all filmed in this garage last winter, so you can take a look at that, and I will keep you guys posted. If you're new to tower gardening, I pray these help to set you up with the greatest success growing indoors, and just really mastering the idea of growing the right foods, growing them often, eat the foods you grow, and cheers guys. I'll see you on the next video.